And here to close out our plenary session is Bruce Katz, the founding director of the Nowak Metro Finance Lab at Drexel University. Previously, he served as inaugural Centennial Scholar at the Brookings Institution and is vice president and director of Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program for the last 20 years. He is a visiting professor in practice at the London School of Economics and previously served as chief of staff to the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and staff director of the Senate Subcommittee on Housing and Urban Affairs. Bruce also co-led the Obama administration's Housing and Urban Transition Team. He is co-author of The Metropolitan Revolution and The New Localism, How Cities Can Thrive in the Age of Populism. Please welcome Bruce Katz.
It's great to be with you. And I just want to say a special word of admiration to the folks who are listening to this. I've followed the International Downtown Association for many years. I know what you do. I know what you do so well. The main message today is you are needed more than ever because we're about to enter some very uncharted territory. So I wanted to talk today about what kind of economic and other implications we're going to see post-COVID when we all come bleary-eyed out of our basements. And I think what will be a radical change in the shape and structure of our downtown economies in the US and beyond. So there was a piece in the Washington Post by Stephen Pearlstein a couple days ago, where he basically said, we are about to see a bust of biblical proportions. That may have just been because we just had the Jewish High Holy Days, but I'm not entirely sure. But I do think, I agree with Stephen in this regard. The public health lockdown and economic contraction that we've seen since March in the United States, and really the failure to get control of the virus in the US, means that we have seen a dramatic structural effect, not just a short-term effect, on office, on downtowns and central business districts and other nodes of commerce as gathering places, and then ultimately on small business. And there's a lot of talk out there about what is short-term and what is long-term. But anyone who basically goes to the hearts of our cities and our metropolitan areas, or to many of our suburban nodes, knows that very few office workers have returned to the office. And what we're all experiencing is a reality that many people may not return, not forever, but on a 5-day-a-week basis. So demand for office is going to be dramatically changed here. Not erased, but changed. The gathering place role that downtowns play, whether it's convention centers, whether it's sports gathering, whether it's cultural institutions, the shutting down of those places has a reverberating effect on hotels and a reverberating effect on the small businesses, the restaurants, the bars, all the different kinds of small enterprises that serve office workers, tourists, people just coming in for a game, so to speak. And those small businesses, whether they're in downtowns or whether they're in neighborhood business districts or commercial corridors, many of them have already shuttered, closed for good, and particularly with regard to Black-owned business and to Brown-owned business, so critical given the racial disparities of the implication of COVID and the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, we are going to see devastating impacts on people of color and the enterprises that they have founded, because they tend to be very small, undercapitalized, and underbanked. And the federal relief effort, which was forged in crisis, basically relied on mainstream financial institutions to deliver Paycheck Protection Program and other relief efforts to small businesses. So we're going to come out of this with some really difficult market dynamics, both in general and with regard to portions of our population. And you can't be Pollyannish about this. I think we're going to go through a period next couple years of real estate restructuring, foreclosures, real estate transfers. And what's going to be so critical during this period is to find entities like those of you on the call today who can basically cut across different sectors of the economy, different geographies of our places, and bring some order out of the chaos, right? Now, some of this will depend, obviously, on who gets elected president and what kind of subsequent federal relief packages or stimulus packages there may be or may not be. Obviously, Congress is missing in action right now. Frolic and detour, I can find many euphemisms to describe what Congress is doing. I think it is actually an act of national malpractice that we are not seeing more relief for unemployed workers and for struggling small businesses. But that will just make the restructuring that is going to come more painful and put more burden on those of you on this call. So a couple thoughts about where we go from here, because at the end of the day, what I learned from Henry Cisneros is solve problems, don't admire problems. Understand what they are, use evidence and data to understand them with greater specificity and granularity, but then do something. And so the doing, I think, falls into multiple categories. And again, we're all trying to figure this out. So this is not delivering tablets from the mountain. We're really trying to understand in real time how to adjust. First, I think we're going to need some different business models. I put a piece out a couple months ago called Main Street Regenerators. This was focused on smaller main streets, business districts, corridors within our cities and suburbs. But it basically took the view that if we wait for every small business to pop back on its own, we may be waiting for a very long time. People's revenue have been deeply circumscribed during this crisis, particularly with Main Street businesses and B2C, business to customers. And their ability to snap back obviously is aligned with the additional costs of dealing with the pandemic, and also their ability to access quality capital that's fit to purpose. So what we put forward in this idea about Main Street Regenerators is we need more of a cooperative model. We need to be thinking about sharing services across small businesses, whether it's services around deep cleaning of their physical space, reconfiguration of their space, or access to back office, taxing, accounting, anyone trying to navigate financial loan products from the federal government. You need help is the bottom line. The big firms got it from their banks. Many small businesses did not. So more cooperative models, almost guild models, essentially, to think through with new intermediaries. What you all do is so critical and actually could be expanded to the notion of Main Street Regenerators, because in a way you match demand and supply. When you think about where customers buy services, which small businesses supply them, what kind of capital those small businesses need, the relationship between large corporations and small businesses, eds and meds, you have the ability to play that matching role, that mediating role, which is so critical in an economy like ours. That function will be more critical than ever post-pandemic or as the pandemic persists, because it can't be every tub on its own bottom. We need to connect the dots. particularly in these places that have been not just nodes of commerce, but centers of civic life. Placemaking is so essential to bringing back our economy because it sends signals not just about the ability of business to go about their business, restaurants spilling out into the streetscape, but it sends signs of civic confidence. We can come back as a community. We can begin to gather, again, still social distance at this point. But I think this role between spaces, right? It's not a vertical role, it's a horizontal role. It cuts across sectors, it cuts across disciplines. You do many different things. That's going to be more critical. Second piece, what are the mixes of activities for downtowns and central business districts? They were office spaces, they were gathering spaces, they were also residential areas. I think we need a bigger concept of what the mixes of activities are. I think in certain cities, and these tend to be at the end of the continuum of weaker market cities, they're beginning to see their downtowns as innovation hubs, innovation districts. I'm doing work in St. Louis right now. They're thinking about a fintech innovation district as Square relocates into the old Post-Dispatch building. There's the National Geospatial Agency. They're thinking about new centers for location science, new centers that build off of their biosciences prowess coming off of Washington University and the Cortex Innovation Hub. So it's quite possible post-pandemic that we begin to see anchor institutions, the EDs, the MEDs, large corporations, unanchoring themselves and beginning to take a portion of their workforce into cores of cities because there's going to be available real estate, right? And it could be that those become not just the traditional office space or the traditional gathering space along the riverfronts or the new downtown living spaces, but really innovation hubs. Durham has already tried to do this with Duke, Phoenix with ASU. So there could be more shifts in location of critical nodes of innovation in our economy. And the last pieces are just the mechanisms by which we do this. Main Street regenerators or regeneration alliances or new kinds of lending facilities or equity investment pools. I do think we're going to sort of break the old mold, so to speak, of how we thought about a business startup, a business scaling, the relationship between anchor procurement and supplier diversity, and the growth of businesses. I think we're going to connect the dots more. We're going to see more buy local, more hire local, more invest local, more locate local. There's going to be a sense, even if the federal government sends out a substantial amount of new resources, that in a world of new localism, where cities are networks, they're not governments, right? They are public, private, civic, community, university, all of it. They're going to need to find new ways to work harder for themselves. That will mean one thing in New York. It will be a very different thing in New Orleans. And it'll be even more different in other parts of our country because the starting points are different. There may be some similarity in our physical configuration, but the economic starting points of what is the raison d'etre of a place? Why are you there? We know why you were founded. It usually was along a riverfront or a waterfront. But what's your 21st century purpose? And how do we take this moment to be the best 21st century version of yourself? How do you grow a purpose-driven economy that can bring more people along for the ride and particularly begin to reduce and repair racial and ethnic divisions in our country? So that's a lot, right? That's a lot, but this is a pandemic of biblical proportions. We have not seen anything like this in the world in 100 years. And we're a much more sophisticated, globally connected economy than we were 100 years ago. And this pandemic has, particularly in our country, particularly in the United States, exposed enormous structural deficiencies and, frankly, institutional racism. And it is impossible to ignore any of this as we go about the business of recovery. If recovery is not inclusive, it is not resilient, I don't think we're going to find in any of our cities and metropolitan areas the kind of locally driven support that we all need to go about the business of rebuild. So I don't think there's a better group of folks who already know how to cut across jurisdictions, act horizontally, be a network than you all on the phone today. So I look forward to interacting. I look forward to any questions, Kathleen, you have for me now.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you so much. As downtown practitioners, there is always a challenge with being a leader. We get pulled in many, many different directions. What would you say is the most important first and second step for organizations like ours right now in a country that's so divided and in an economic situation, as you say, of biblical proportions? What should we do first and second?
Well, I think one of your key attributes is, frankly, legitimacy. And I mean, the organizations on this call today have got stuff done, right? In Congress, you're rewarded for partisan alignment and obstruction. At the local level, you're rewarded for action, right? I mean, you basically are held up if you're able to achieve things, even in fragmented political and sectoral environments. So I think a lot of what has to happen now is quiet in some respects. You want to strengthen your strong ties, those stakeholders who have been with you for a long time. You want to keep all of you together and also reach out to some others that perhaps you have not had substantial relationships with that might basically enable you to achieve some of these broader societal goals that we're going to all have to achieve. Racial equity, inclusive growth in our cities is the order of the moment, irrespective of who is elected president, right? These are the most demographically diverse places in the country. Always have been and will be. So I think the most important thing to start with is strengthen your networks, because this is going to be a network-driven recovery at the downtown and city level. And the second thing is choose just a few things to signal that you're coming back, to send a sense of confidence that we can do this. And whether that's changes to the streetscape, right, or celebrating businesses that have survived, or finding existing tenants or landlords that are re-upping for the hall. It's so important now to send signals to the broader community. We've got this. It's tough, it's hard, but we've got it. And then the broader, obviously going down the line, are some of the larger structural initiatives, whether it's new models, whether it's new mixes of activities, whether it's new mechanisms. But right now is a time, I think, for all of us to cohere and act as leaders, essentially. And leaders inspire confidence, not because they've solved everything. In fact, they usually admit where they don't know the answer, but because they're sending signals, we are moving here. And we get, whether Washington operates or not, we understand the burden is on us to design and deliver the kind of strategies that matter to our own communities.
Thank you again, Bruce, for spending time with us today and for always being so supportive of the International Downtown Association. We've spoken on many occasions in the past, and always your words are inspiring, and I'd like to thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me, and it's great to be with you in a very strange period.
Indeed.